August 1, 1943. Hundreds of American bombers are flying not at safety altitude, but just a few hundred feet above the ground, screaming over fields and villages in Romania. Ahead of them lies Ploiești, Nazi Germany's most critical oil complex, and one of the most heavily defended targets on Earth. They are flying straight into a wall of fire. Radar-guided guns, hidden flak batteries, German and Romanian fighters waiting like wolves. And leading this suicidal charge into the heart of Hitler's fuel supply is not the famous B-17. It's the other bomber, the one that carried more men, more bombs, more fuel, and flew more missions than any other American heavy in the war. The Consolidated B-24 Liberator. For decades, the B-24 lived in the shadow of the B-17 Flying Fortress in popular memory. But if you were a U-boat commander in the Atlantic, a German transport pilot over Crete, or a Japanese soldier watching long-range bombers appear over a remote island, it wasn't the B-17 you feared. It was this aircraft. A fast, ugly, boxy-winged monster that quietly rewrote the rules of aerial warfare. Today, we're going to uncover how the B-24 Liberator extended the reach of Allied air power across oceans, crushed the German U-boat menace, hit vital oil supply and transport targets far beyond the reach of other bombers, and helped turn strategic bombing into a truly global weapon. This is the story of the bomber that redefined aerial warfare and the men who flew it.
To understand why the B-24 mattered so much, we have to rewind to the late 1930s. The United States Army Air Corps already had a heavy bomber in development, the Boeing B-17. Sleek, graceful, and designed to fly high and take punishment. But the Air Corps wanted more range, more speed, more bomb load. They wanted a bomber that could reach much farther than anything else in the sky. So they went to another company, Consolidated Aircraft. Consolidated could have simply built B-17s under license. Instead, they made a bold promise. We can design something better for your needs. Faster, longer range, bigger payload. And the heart of this new bomber would be a radical design feature, the Davis wing, a long, slender, high aspect ratio wing that looked almost too thin to work. But that wing offered something priceless in war: efficiency. Less drag, more lift, more fuel, more range. And so, on the drawing boards, a new shape took form. A tall, boxy fuselage, a twin tail for better stability, a high-mounted, long, elegant wing, and massive bomb bays that would give the plane its ultimate punch. It didn't look pretty. Even many pilots called it a flying boxcar. But war doesn't care about pretty. War cares about performance. In December 1939, the prototype took to the skies. The B-24 Liberator was born.
On paper, the B-24 and B-17 might look similar. Both four-engine heavy bombers, both bristling with machine guns, both designed to crush the enemy from the sky. But the numbers tell a different story. The B-24 could typically fly faster than the B-17, carry a heavier bomb load, travel longer distances thanks to that famous Davis wing and its massive fuel capacity. This meant one thing in wartime terms: reach. Reach into the mid-Atlantic where U-boats thought they were safe. Reach to oil fields and depots beyond the range of other Allied bombers. Reach out across vast stretches of the Pacific, hopping from island to island. The B-24 was not just another heavy bomber. It was a strategic tool that extended the geography of Allied air power. There was a price, of course. Its high wing and thin Davis profile gave it less forgiving handling at low speeds. It could be harder to fly, more dangerous during takeoff and landing, and more fragile when hit in certain places. Ask a veteran which aircraft he preferred, and you might hear, "I'd rather crash in a B-17, but I'd rather fight the war in a B-24. Because in terms of pure warfighting potential, the Liberator gave commanders something they desperately needed: options. When the United States entered World War II, after Pearl Harbor, the B-24 was still ramping up production. But the timing was almost perfect. America needed bombers, fast. Bombers to defend the coasts, to patrol the seas, to strike back across vast oceans. And this is where the B-24 showed its true potential. Unlike many aircraft that were locked into a single role, the Liberator quickly became a multi-role workhorse. A heavy bomber striking land targets, a long-range maritime patrol aircraft hunting submarines, a transport, a reconnaissance platform, even a makeshift tanker in some cases. By 1944, B-24s were rolling off assembly lines in unbelievable numbers. At places like Willow Run, Ford's giant bomber factory, aircraft weren't just built, they were mass-produced like cars. At its peak, one B-24 rolled off the line roughly every hour. Think about that. Every hour, a new heavy bomber, capable of flying across continents and oceans, joined the Allied arsenal. Quantity isn't everything in war, but when quantity meets quality and reach, it becomes a weapon in itself.
Before we talk about cities and oil fields, we need to talk about the Battle of the Atlantic, the lifeline of the Allied war effort. In the early years of the war, German U-boats were winning. They prowled the mid-Atlantic Gap, a deadly zone beyond the range of land-based Allied aircraft. Convoys that entered this gap were effectively blind and unprotected from the air. Perfect prey for wolf packs of submarines. Britain was being strangled. Food, fuel, weapons, all at risk. If the Atlantic lifeline was cut, the Allies would lose the war without a single city being bombed from the air. This is where the B-24 quietly became one of the most important aircraft of the entire conflict. Because of its exceptional range, especially in modified Liberator patrol variants, the B-24 could patrol far over the open ocean. For the first time, Allied air cover pushed deep into the mid-Atlantic Gap. Search radars, lee lights, depth charges, and bombs turned the Liberator into a lethal submarine hunter. Imagine being a U-boat commander. You surface at night to recharge your batteries, believing you're safe, hidden in the darkness and distance. Then, suddenly, floodlights, search radar, the scream of engines. A B-24 diving out of the night, dropping lethal charges into the water. The results were devastating. As more long-range B-24s joined Coastal Command and the U.S. Navy, the safe zones for U-boats rapidly shrank. German crews began calling these aircraft the Scouts of Death. By closing the mid-Atlantic Gap, the B-24 helped turn the tide in the Battle of the Atlantic. Without that victory, there would have been no D-Day, no massive buildup in Britain, no sustained bombing campaign over Europe. In many ways, the Liberator first redefined aerial warfare not over cities, but over empty ocean. But if the Atlantic was where the B-24 proved its strategic reach, Ploiești was where it proved its raw courage. Hitler's war machine ran on oil, and much of that oil flowed from one place, the Romanian oil fields and refineries around Ploiești. This made them an obvious target and a terrifying one.
By 1943, Ploiești was layered with anti-aircraft guns, radar, smoke generators, and defenses designed specifically to kill bombers. The Allies knew that conventional high-altitude bombing wasn't enough. Accuracy at that height was poor, and each missed bomb meant more fuel for German tanks and aircraft. So planners came up with a brutal solution. The bombers would go in low. Not at 20,000 feet, but sometimes at less than 200 feet, skimming treetops, chimneys, and power lines. The aircraft for this mission? The B-24 Liberator. On August 1, 1943, in Operation Tidal Wave, nearly 180 B-24s roared toward Ploiești from bases in North Africa. Formation flying at low altitude over hundreds of miles. Columns of Liberators streaming just above the landscape, hugging the terrain to avoid radar detection. It was chaos. Navigation errors, thick smoke, fires, exploding fuel tanks, towers, and obstacles tearing through wings and fuselages. Crews saw other Liberators explode in midair. They flew through fireballs. They watched friends vanish in clouds of black smoke. But they pressed on. In one of the war's most daring and costly missions, the B-24 proved it could do what other heavy bombers couldn't: deliver massive payloads at low level through dense defenses onto a vital strategic target. The cost was horrific. Many aircraft never came home. Hundreds of airmen were killed, wounded, or captured. Strategically, the raid dealt serious damage to Ploiești's output, though the Germans worked furiously to repair it. But more importantly, it sent a message. There was now no target so distant, so defended, or so vital that the Allies would not send B-24 crews against it. This was aerial warfare as a blunt, brutal strategic instrument.
While Ploiești was a dramatic one-day showcase of the Liberator's courage, the B-24's impact over Europe was also measured in grinding, relentless persistence. Alongside the B-17, B-24s formed the backbone of the U.S. 8th and 15th Air Force's strategic bombing campaigns. They hit aircraft factories, railway yards, ball bearing plants, industrial centers, synthetic fuel plants, transportation hubs feeding the German war machine. Again and again, Liberators fought through flak corridors and dense fighter opposition. Their longer range allowed them to reach deeper targets earlier and with heavier bomb loads. Inside the aircraft, conditions were brutal. At high altitudes, temperatures could plunge well below freezing. Gunners' oxygen masks froze. Metal surfaces burned bare skin with cold. The rumble of 4 engines made normal speech impossible. Every mission meant hours of sitting in a thin aluminum shell surrounded by fuel tanks and bombs, knowing that any hit could turn the aircraft into a fireball. And yet they went back, day after day. Strategic bombing remains controversial, and historians still debate how much it shortened the war. But there is no question that by 1944, German industry was under constant pressure. Fuel supplies were strained, transportation systems were repeatedly shattered, and the Nazi leadership had to divert manpower, guns, and fighters away from the front lines to defend the skies above the Reich. The Liberator was central to this pressure. Not always glamorous, not always remembered, but indispensable.
If Europe showed the B-24's power over industry, the Pacific showed its power over distance. The Pacific theater was defined by space, endless miles of ocean, tiny dots of islands that suddenly mattered more than anyone had ever imagined. The U.S. needed bombers that could reach those islands, hit Japanese bases, and return, often with little or no fighter escort. Once again, the B-24 Liberator stepped forward. Its range allowed missions from Australia to New Guinea, island bases to Japanese strongholds, long-haul patrols over shipping lanes and remote outposts. In the Pacific, B-24s bombed airfields, ports, and fuel depots, attacked shipping convoys bringing supplies to Japanese garrisons, supported invasions by softening up defenses ahead of amphibious assaults. For Japanese troops isolated in remote island bases, the deep drone of distant engines often meant one thing: liberators were coming, and they could come from farther away than the enemy expected. Over and over again, the B-24 turned geography, once Japan's greatest asset, into something less secure. There was almost nowhere to hide.
Machines don't redefine warfare by themselves. It's the human beings inside them. A typical B-24 crew consisted of around 10 men: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, flight engineer or top turret gunner, radio operator, waist gunners, tail gunner, sometimes a nose or belly gunner depending on the variant. Each man had a role. Each role was critical. The pilot and co-pilot wrestled with a heavy, sometimes unforgiving aircraft, especially during takeoff with full fuel and bomb loads. The navigator was the difference between hitting the target or vanishing into cloud, flak, or the sea. The bombardier, once the bomb bay doors opened, held the responsibility of thousands of pounds of destruction and the lives of everyone below. Gunners stared into cold, empty sky for hours, scanning for the sudden flash of enemy fighters. Every crew member knew something else as well. If the plane caught fire, if the wing was hit at the root, if fuel tanks ruptured, the aircraft could go from solid metal fortress to flaming wreck in seconds. Yet crews formed bonds inside that noisy, drafty, icy cockpit that lasted a lifetime. They decorated noses with pin-up art and mascots. They gave their aircraft names, sometimes humorous, sometimes grim, sometimes deeply personal. To them, the B-24 wasn't just an industrial product. It was home, shield, and sometimes coffin. The Liberator carried them farther than almost any bomber of its time, but it also asked more of them in return.
The story of how the B-24 redefined aerial warfare isn't just about missions and targets. It's also about industry. The scale of B-24 production transformed how heavy bomber warfare worked. The Liberator was produced by a consortium of manufacturers: Consolidated, Ford, Douglas, North American, and others. Ford, the Willow Run plant became a symbol of American industrial might. A single, massive factory that turned raw materials into finished bombers. This industrialization of bomber production meant that heavy bombers went from rare, specialized assets to something closer to a mass-produced weapon. Instead of a few elite squadrons, entire fleets could be fielded. With enough B-24s, commanders could keep constant pressure across multiple theaters, sustain losses yet keep flying, apply air power not as a one-time strike, but as a continuous campaign. This is one of the deepest ways the Liberator changed aerial warfare. It wasn't only about what one plane could do. It was about what thousands of them, built efficiently, deployed globally, and flown relentlessly, could do to an enemy's capacity to wage war.
When the war ended, the world moved on. Jet aircraft were on the horizon. Nuclear weapons redefined strategic bombing overnight. Many B-24s, once precious assets, were flown to scrapyards and cut up for metal. The B-17, with its romantic flying fortress name and iconic shape, captured much of the public imagination. The B-24, boxy and unloved, quietly faded into the background. But if you examine the record, its shadow is impossible to ignore. More B-24s were built than any other American bomber. They served in every major theater of war. They closed the deadly gaps at sea. They struck critical, distant targets. They reshaped the logistics and scale of strategic air campaigns. The Liberator showed what happens when air power gains true reach, when bombers don't just support nearby battles, but project influence across oceans and continents. This concept, long-range, sustained air power able to hit anywhere, became fundamental to post-war strategy. In a sense, the B-24 was a bridge. A bridge between the era of vulnerable, short-range bombers and the age of global air power.
When we talk about technology redefining warfare, it's easy to get lost in statistics. Range, payload, production numbers. But every mission flown by a B-24 came with a cost written in human lives. Crews who vanished over black Atlantic water. Men who never returned from low-level strikes through flak and fire. Aircraft that simply disappeared into cloud and never called back. Their sacrifice turned the Liberator from a sketch on a blueprint into a weapon that changed the shape of the war. The next time you hear about World War II bombers, you'll probably hear about the Flying Fortress. But somewhere in the background, remember the other giant of the skies. The boxy, unloved, relentless bomber that flew farther, carried more, and quietly helped win battles over seas, oil, industry, and distance itself. The Consolidated B-24 Liberator. The aircraft that didn't just fight in the war. It helped redefine how war could be fought from the air.